Bjarni Herjolfsson was not an explorer. He was a merchant's son trying to reach his father's farm in Greenland around the year 986, and the North Atlantic had other plans for him. A storm caught his ship somewhere west of Iceland, drove it south and west for days under heavy fog, and when the weather finally cleared, Bjarni found himself staring at a coastline he had never seen described in any saga or sailing poem. It was low, forested, and green, nothing like the ice-covered mountains of Greenland. His crew wanted to go ashore. Bjarni refused. His destination was Greenland, not some unknown forest, and the sailing season was ending. He turned north, hugged the strange coast for several days, noting that the land changed from forest to flat stone to glacial rock, then caught a favorable wind and crossed back to Greenland, arriving at his father's farm at Herjolfsnes. He had likely become the first European to lay eyes on the North American mainland. Nobody thanked him for it. The Greenlanders mocked him for his lack of curiosity. When he eventually traveled to Norway and told his story to the Earl, he was criticized again for failing to investigate. Bjarni Herjolfsson had glimpsed a new world and turned away. History would give the credit to someone else. That someone was Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, and he was everything Bjarni was not: bold, charismatic, and deeply curious about what lay to the southwest. Around the year 1000, Leif bought Bjarni's ship, assembled a crew of 35 men, and set sail from Greenland, retracing Bjarni's route in reverse. The voyage unfolded like a map being drawn in real time. Sailing southwest, Leif's crew first reached a barren coast of flat stone slabs and glaciers. Leif named it Helluland, Slabland. Modern scholars generally identify this as the southern coast of Baffin Island. There was nothing here worth stopping for, so they continued south. The next landfall was heavily forested, with long white sand beaches stretching to the horizon. Leif called it Markland, Forest Land, almost certainly the coast of Labrador. The timber alone would have been extraordinary to men from treeless Greenland, but Leif pressed on. After 2 more days of sailing with a northeast wind, they spotted a headland with an island just offshore. They entered a shallow bay where the tide ran far out over sand flats, and they found a place where a river flowed from a lake into the sea, navigable by ship only at high tide. The land was unlike anything they had known. The grass was green and thick. The river was full of salmon, larger than any they had seen. And the winter, when it came, was astonishingly mild. No snow, no frozen fjords, no starving cattle carried to pasture in spring. Then came the discovery that gave the land its name. One day, a member of the crew, a German named Tyrker, who had been a part of Eric the Red's household and helped raise Leif as a boy, went missing. A search party found him wandering in the woods, muttering excitedly to himself in German, too agitated to speak Norse properly. When he finally calmed down, he explained he had found grapes. Wild grapes, growing in abundance, heavy on the vine. Tyrker, who had grown up in southern Europe, recognized them immediately. To the Norse, who knew grapes only as an expensive import, this was treasure. Leif named the land Vinland, the land of wine. In the spring, his crew loaded the ship with timber and towed a small boat filled with grapes back to Greenland. On the return voyage, Leif spotted a wrecked ship stranded on a reef and rescued the surviving crew, an act of seamanship and generosity that earned him the nickname Leif the Lucky. The news of Vinland electrified the small Norse world. Timber, salmon, wild grapes, mild winters. Everything Greenland lacked, this land had in abundance. Expeditions followed in quick succession over the next decade. Leif's brother Thorvald led the second voyage, sailing with about 30 men. They spent 2 summers exploring the coastline, west in the first year, east and south in the second. The saga of the Greenlanders describes the land they found in warm, admiring terms: wooded hills, clean beaches, shallow waters rich with fish. Thorvald reportedly stood on a beautiful headland and declared, "This is where I would like to make my home." It was near this spot that the Norse encountered the people who already lived there. The sagas call them Skrælings, a word whose exact meaning is debated, but was clearly not respectful. The encounter was sudden and tense. The Norse found a group of people sheltering under overturned skin boats on a beach. The meeting ended in violence. Thorvald was struck by an arrow during a subsequent confrontation and died of his wound, the first recorded European casualty on North American soil. His crew buried him on the headland he had admired, marked the grave with crosses, and sailed home to Greenland. The most ambitious Vinland expedition came next, organized by an Icelandic merchant named Thorfinn Karlsefni. His party was large. The saga of Eric the Red says 140 to 160 people. The saga of the Greenlanders says 60. They brought livestock, intending not just to explore, but to stay. Among them was a woman named Gudrid Torbjarnadóttir, Karlsefni's wife, who was already one of the most remarkable figures in the saga world, twice widowed, widely traveled, and possessed of what the sagas describe as both beauty and good sense. At Vinland, the expedition established a base and began trading with the local people. The Skrælings were interested in Norse goods, particularly red cloth and dairy products, and brought animal furs and pelts in exchange. For a time, the relationship was cautious but functional. Then something went wrong. The saga of the Greenlanders says the Norse bull charged out of the woods and terrified the Skrælings. The saga of Eric the Red describes a more gradual breakdown. Either way, the result was the same. The indigenous people attacked in force, arriving in a fleet of skin boats. The Norse survived, but the message was clear. They were outnumbered, far from home, and incapable of defending a permanent settlement against a population that knew the land, the rivers, and the coastline far better than they ever would. During this expedition, Gudrid gave birth to a son named Snorri Thorfinnsson, the first European child known to have been born in the Americas. The detail is recorded almost casually in the sagas, tucked between accounts of trade disputes and skirmishes, but it carries enormous weight. A child was born on this continent 500 years before any Spanish boot touched Caribbean sand. Karlsefni's expedition returned to Greenland after 2 or 3 years. The sagas record at least one more Vinland voyage, a troubled expedition led by Freydis Eriksdóttir, Eric the Red's daughter. But after that, the voyages stopped. The Norse never returned to settle. Why did they fail? The answer is not dramatic. It is structural. Greenland's total population was roughly 2,500 people. Even the largest Vinland expedition represented a significant fraction of the entire colony's workforce. Maintaining a settlement across an ocean crossing of several days, with no possibility of rapid reinforcement or resupply, was simply beyond the demographic and logistical capacity of Norse Greenland. They did not have enough people to hold a distant shore against a numerous and capable indigenous population. They did not have enough ships to maintain a reliable supply line, and they did not have enough reason to try. Vinland's grapes and timber were wonderful, but they were not survival necessities. Walrus ivory, Greenland's cash crop, could not be found there. The Norse had arrived in North America too early, centuries before European populations, economies, and maritime technologies would be large enough and advanced enough to sustain transatlantic colonization. They had the ships and the courage, but not the numbers. It is one of history's most poignant mismatches. The right people, the right skills, the wrong century. They sailed home, and slowly the world forgot. The Norse did not vanish from the North Atlantic overnight. After the Vinland expeditions ended, Greenland's two settlements continued to function for another 4 centuries. Ships still crossed between Greenland and Norway, carrying ivory west to east and iron east to west. Icelandic chronicles mention a Greenlandic bishop named Erik Gnupsson who went to seek Vinland in 1121, a tantalizing one-line entry with no follow-up. In 1347, a ship arrived in Iceland after being blown off course on its way home from Markland to Greenland, carrying timber. Proof that the Greenlanders were still visiting the North American coast to harvest wood more than 300 years after Leif Erikson's voyage. But the world around them was contracting. The medieval warm period that had made Norse Atlantic expansion possible was ending. By the early 1300s, the climate was shifting decisively toward what scientists now call the Little Ice Age, a period of colder temperatures, expanding sea ice, and more violent storms that would last roughly 500 years. For Europe, the Little Ice Age brought crop failures, famines, political upheaval, and, some scholars argue, conditions that accelerated the spread of the Black Death. For the Norse Greenlanders, it was existential. Sea ice advanced southward, making the crossing between Norway and Greenland longer, more dangerous, and less predictable. Fjords that once stayed open through the sailing season began freezing earlier and thawing later. Growing seasons shortened, pastures shrank. The herds of cattle and sheep that sustained the settlements grew thinner each year. Archaeologist Thomas McGovern, who has studied the Norse Greenland problem for over 4 decades, summarized the old explanation bluntly. The old story was, these poor dumb Norsemen go up there and they're all maladapted and they all died when it got cold. But recent research has complicated that narrative considerably. Isotopic analysis of Norse skeletons from Greenland, including some unearthed at Eric the Red's own farm at Brattahlid, revealed a profound dietary shift across the centuries. Early settlers ate primarily beef and lamb, the products of their farms. Later generations consumed far more seal meat and marine resources. The Norse were not rigidly clinging to a failed farming model. They were adapting, becoming, as one archaeologist put it, essentially hunters that farm a bit, as opposed to farmers who hunt a little. What they could not adapt to was the collapse of their economy. Greenland's lifeline to Europe was walrus ivory, and by the 13th century, that market was crumbling. Elephant ivory from Africa was entering European markets in increasing quantities, undercutting walrus tusk prices. Worse, the entire European trade system was shifting. The Viking Age economy had been built on luxury goods, precious objects traded across vast distances. But medieval Europe was transitioning to a commodity economy based on bulk foodstuffs, grain, wool, fish, timber. Greenland had none of these in exportable quantities. Their one valuable product was becoming worthless. Yet the Norse kept hunting walruses, pushing further and further north into the Arctic. A 2024 DNA study showed they likely traveled as far as high Arctic Canada to find the animals. The tusks they brought back were getting smaller, taken from increasingly remote populations. It was a death spiral. More risk, more distance, less return. But what else could they trade? Without ivory, there was no reason for European ships to make the dangerous crossing to Greenland. And without European ships, there was no iron, no timber, no grain, no connection to the wider world. The last recorded voyage between Norway and Greenland occurred in 1410. The last news from the colony described a wedding in 1408 at Walsey Church, a structure whose stone walls still stand today, the best preserved Norse ruin in Greenland. After that, silence. No letters, no ships, no survivors showing up in Iceland or Norway with tales of what had gone wrong. By around 1450, the eastern settlement was empty. Archaeologists believe the western settlement had collapsed even earlier, perhaps by the late 1300s. Somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 people, the entire Norse population of Greenland had vanished. When a Norwegian missionary named Hans Egede sailed to Greenland in 1721, hoping to find Vikings and convert them to Lutheranism, he found only Inuit. The Norse were gone. They had missed the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Age of Exploration. They had missed everything. And with them went the living memory of Vinland. The Icelandic sagas survived in manuscript form, but for centuries, European scholars dismissed the Vinland accounts as fantasy, Norse fairy tales, not serious history. The idea that Vikings had reached North America 500 years before Columbus was treated as folklore, not fact. It would take another 5 centuries, a Norwegian couple with a theory, and an old fisherman who knew where the strange mounds were to bring the story back. In 1960, a Norwegian explorer named Helge Ingstad and his wife, the archaeologist Anne Steen Ingstad, arrived on the northern tip of Newfoundland with a hypothesis and not much else. Helge had spent years studying the Vinland sagas, not as literature, but as navigational documents. He believed the sailing directions embedded in the medieval texts, the descriptions of coastlines, currents, distances, and landmarks, were accurate enough to retrace. If Helluland was Baffin Island and Markland was Labrador, then Vinland had to be further south, somewhere along the coast of Newfoundland. And the sagas described a very specific kind of site, a place where a river flowed from a lake to the sea, with shallow tidal flats and meadows nearby. Helge sailed the Newfoundland coast, stopping at every village to ask the same question. Had anyone seen old ruins that did not look like they belonged to the local indigenous cultures? At the fishing hamlet of Lonso Meadows, a man named George Decker said yes. He led Helge to a series of low mounds on the grassy shore that the locals had always called the Old Indian Camp. Helge looked at the mounds and saw something the locals had not: their shape, their layout, their orientation to the water. They looked Norse. Anne Steen took over the excavation. For the next 8 years, from 1961 to 1968, an international team carefully peeled back layers of turf and soil. What they found was unmistakable. 8 buildings constructed in the Norse style, sod over wood frame with long central hearths and side benches for sleeping. A smithy with a forge and iron slag, proving that someone had smelted bog iron here using a technique unknown to the indigenous peoples of Newfoundland. A small bronze pin of a type common in Norse settlements across the North Atlantic. A bone needle, a spindle whorl, stone oil lamps. Over 800 artifacts in total. And in the bog near the site, butternut shells. This was a crucial detail. Butternuts do not grow anywhere near Newfoundland. Their northern limit is the St. Lawrence River Valley, hundreds of miles to the south. Whoever lived at Lonceau Meadows had not stayed put. They had explored far down the coast, reaching regions where wild grapes also grow. The saga's accounts of Vinland's grapes were not fantasy, they were memory. Carbon dating placed the occupation between 990 and 1050 CE. Decades later, a 2021 study in Nature used a different approach. Researchers examined tree ring patterns in wood debris from the site and cross-referenced them with a known spike in atmospheric carbon-14 caused by a solar storm in the year 993. By counting rings from that marker to the bark edge, they determined that Norse people were cutting living trees at Lonceau Meadows in the year 1021, a date of almost miraculous precision for a 1,000-year-old site. The Ingstad's discovery did not merely confirm the Vinland sagas, it rewrote the timeline of European contact with the Americas. In 1968, the Canadian government designated Lonceau Meadows a National Historic Site. In 1978, UNESCO inscribed it as a World Heritage Site, one of the first 12 sites on Earth to receive the designation. Today, visitors can walk among reconstructed sod buildings on the grassy shore and look out at the same cold Atlantic that Norse sailors crossed a millennium ago. What does this story mean? It is tempting to frame it as a tale of discovery, Europeans finding the New World, planting a flag, changing history. But the truth is more complicated and more interesting than that. The Norse did not discover North America. The continent had been inhabited for at least 15,000 years before Leif Erikson was born. The people the Norse called Skrælings, ancestors of today's Inuit and First Nations peoples, had built complex cultures across the land long before any Viking ship appeared on the horizon. What the Norse achieved was a connection, the first known physical link between the European and North American worlds, a bridge of wood and sail and human stubbornness that existed briefly and then vanished. And the reasons it vanished are as instructive as the reasons it was built. The Norse failed to colonize Vinland not because they lacked courage or skill. They failed because the scale of the endeavor exceeded the capacity of their society. Greenland was too small, too remote, too fragile to project power across another ocean. The same qualities that made the Norse extraordinary, their willingness to sail into the unknown, their ability to survive on margins that would defeat most peoples, also defined their limits. You can cross an ocean in an open boat, but you cannot hold a continent with 2,500 people. There is something else worth remembering about this story. It was not kings or empires that drove the Norse across the Atlantic. It was ordinary people, farmers' sons with no land to inherit, outlaws with nowhere left to go, families looking for a place where the grass was green and the river was full of fish. Nadod was blown off course in a storm. Floki followed a raven. Eric the Red was running from a murder sentence. Bjarni Herjolfsson was just trying to visit his father. Leif Erikson heard a good story and wanted to see if it was true. These were not figures of myth. They were people making decisions under pressure with incomplete information in small boats on a very large ocean. Their story survived for 1,000 years, first as spoken words passed from one generation to the next in fire-lit longhouses during Icelandic winters, then as ink on vellum in 13th century manuscripts, and finally as artifacts in the soil of a Newfoundland meadow. Today, if you stand at Lonsson Meadows on a quiet morning, you hear nothing but wind and the slow rhythm of waves against the shore. The grass covers everything. The sod buildings are gone, their outlines preserved only as gentle depressions in the earth. The forge is cold, the smithy is empty. The butternut shells have been carefully removed to museum collections. But the place remembers. 1,000 years ago, a wooden ship with a shallow draft and a single square sail rounded that headland and entered this bay. Men and women stepped onto this shore, carrying tools and stories, and the unshakable conviction that the world was larger than anyone had told them. They were right. They had sailed to the edge of everything they knew, and they found more. The grass grew over their footprints. The sagas kept their names, and 500 years later, when a different set of European ships arrived on these same shores and called it Discovery, the proof that someone had been here first was already waiting, patient, silent, and buried just beneath the surface, exactly where they left it. There is something about this story that stays with you long after the facts have settled. I think it is the silence, not the silence of failure, but the silence of something extraordinary that happened and then simply went unheard. 1,000 years ago, ordinary people built wooden boats with their own hands, loaded them with everything they owned, and sailed past the edge of every map that existed. They did not know what was out there. They went anyway. And when they found something remarkable, they did not carve their names into cliffs or raise monuments. They came home and told the story, voice to voice, generation to generation, for 200 years before ink ever touched the page. We live in an age that records everything and remembers very little. The Norse had no cameras, no written language for daily use, no way to preserve experience except through the act of telling. And yet their stories outlasted empires. A spoken poem about a man who followed a raven to an island of ice, composed by firelight in a turf-roofed house, survived long enough to be proven true by scientists armed with radiocarbon dating and solar storm data. Maybe the lesson is simply this. The world has always been full of people who looked at the horizon and wanted to know what was on the other side. Not because anyone ordered them, not because there was profit in it, but because the question was there and they could not leave it unanswered. Leif Erikson did not change the world. The settlement in Vinland lasted barely a generation. No trade routes were opened, no cities were founded. But a young man heard a story about a strange coast seen through fog, bought the ship, gathered a crew, and sailed west. He found grapes growing wild on a shore that smelled of pine and salt, and something no one in his world had ever known before. The grass at Lonsson Meadows does not know any of this. It grows the way it has always grown, bending under the same Atlantic wind. But beneath it, the soil still holds charcoal from a Norse forge that burned in the year 1021. Someone lit that fire. Someone stood on that shore and thought for a moment that anything was possible. I like to believe they were right.